I feel like I was in a movie, some kind of a movie studio thing there. Okay, there we go. Let me just put my system up here. 1 second. And there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. As mentioned, my name is Mark Takata, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about myself in a second. Today, we are going to be talking about array objects in ColdFusion. This is one of several ColdFusion Foundations series that I am doing. This is actually the second one. The first one was last month on lists. That should be available on YouTube very soon, if not already there. So let's hop in here and see what we're going to learn about. So first, we're going to start out with who am I? You've learned a little bit about me. You'll learn a little bit more. And then we're going to jump into what exactly arrays are. So one thing to know about today's course, today's class, is that it's very basic. We're starting from the foundations. We're starting from the fundamentals. So you may already know some of this stuff, but I just want to make sure that we catch people up, people who are maybe new to programming and deciding whether ColdFusion is right for them, as well as folks that have been programming for a while and maybe just need a little bit of an update to their knowledge. We're going to talk about best practices as well as anti-patterns for array usage. And then we're just going to jump into looking at the actual functions in Adobe ColdFusion. We're going to look at what they do, how they work, syntax, maybe a little bit on how to use them. And occasionally I'll jump into the code to actually show you a few things. Most of these are actually active. So we will actually be using a tool that I built. That code will be available to you on GitHub in a few days. So if you want to download this stuff and play with it, you'll be able to do that as well. So let's just jump right into it. Hi, I'm Mark Takata, and I'm the Senior Technical Evangelist for Adobe ColdFusion. I've been here for just over 4 years now, but I've been a developer for 30 years. And ColdFusion was actually my first real programming language that I learned about 30 years ago. This is actually the 30th anniversary this year of Adobe ColdFusion, and I've been here essentially from the start. I'm a polymath. I do know other languages. As mentioned, I know about 14. I'm working on the 15th. We're not sure what I want to do. Rust is maybe something I'm considering going into, but we'll see. I'm not sure how much I want to get rid of all of my free time. And I live in West Sacramento, California, which oddly enough is west of Sacramento, but is not part of Sacramento, nor are we in the same county. Right. So enough of that. Arrays. What are arrays? So arrays are a type of data structure. And if you attended my class last month, you'll know that lists also are a first-class data structure in ColdFusion. Well, arrays are essentially in every language out there. It's one of those core concepts that most languages have in them. It's basically common to every one of them. I think R was the only one that did some really kind of oddball things with arrays years ago. They've actually normalized to treat arrays, multidimensional arrays, much more like other languages now. But unlike lists, arrays don't have delimiter issues because they're not delimited, they're demarcated, meaning that the pieces inside of them are surrounded by structure when you're actually building them. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just willy-nilly use them. You do occasionally have to escape some characters when putting in information in it, specifically things like quotes. That's just sort of the nature of the beast. If you think about them in like physical terms, they're very much like having a set of buckets all in a row. And each bucket has an index and basically an ID. Like you know which bucket is which inside of that row. Now, this is ColdFusion, so as you might actually remember from other talks, ColdFusion arrays start, indices in ColdFusion start at 1. Same with lists, same with structs, everything. We start at 1. Most other languages start at 0. There's a long, drawn-out explanation of why that is. Suffice it to say, just try to remember that everything starts at 1. If you try to grab an index at 0, you'll get an out of index error and things will blow up and cats and dogs will live together and your fridge will get defrosted. So um, now, the nice thing about these is that you can actually shift and move them and replace them and get rid of them and add new ones really easily. And that's actually what all of the functions that we're going to be talking about today do. It's why they exist. There's ways to do some of the things in these functions more manually. However, these make your life a lot easier. They make your code a lot more readable and performant and all of that. You'll also see, and this comes up occasionally when people talk about ColdFusion, that some of the built-in functions seem superfluous. Like, hey, this particular one, this does exactly what this other one does with a particular switch on it or with a particular type or a particular method of using it. And that's totally true. So you will see a little bit of overlap in the way that things work. The reason for that really is ease of use. ColdFusion makes hard things easy. We want to make sure that if you want to do this one very, very particular thing, that there's a specific function for that, so you don't have to worry about putting flags or other things into it. You can just do the thing. And Array Max is a great example of that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, very important. Arrays can be multidimensional within limits. What does that actually mean? So that means that if you have an array inside of another array cell, so for example, you have cell 1 and cell 1 has an array AB. It's a two-dimensional array. Most arrays are one-dimensional. They just kind of go straight across. This has two dimensions. Unlike lists, because you could have lists of lists. Again, if you saw my talk, you could have a list inside of a list, and some people use that to create their own kind of like quasi multi-dimensional data objects. However, in lists, you have to pull the first list and then pull the second list. In arrays, you can actually access that deep info by using something like variable name 1 and then 9. So that would be the first cell and then the ninth of the second dimension without any other loops like you'd need a list. It's very, very powerful. It's very useful for things like data science, vector algebra, AI, right? AI has a lot of these types of structures. Now, beyond 3 dimensions, you have to do a few tricks. It's very, very rare. There are definitely places where it's used, but it's pretty rare that you and I, in the course of just doing things daily, will end up running into more than 3 dimensions. It's also very hard for our our brains to process things deeper than that. In fact, I like at 2 dimensions, I start to get jello leaking out of my ears. So in any case, it's possible to do all of that in arrays. The other thing in ColdFusion, which is a little bit surprising for some folks coming in from other languages, is that an array can have disparate data types. So you can have an array with a string, a date, a numeric, right, a decimal. You can have all of those things inside of the same array. Often in many languages, arrays are typed. So an array can be an array of Booleans, an array of numbers. Not in ColdFusion. And also remember, ColdFusion is duck typed, meaning it auto casts things to what it believes they are. So you have to be really, really careful when creating arrays. Also, and this is a big gotcha, we'll talk about this in just a couple minutes when I start showing you the functions, but some array functions require a certain type of array. So, for example, an array sum, as I'll show you in a little bit, you can't have an array of strings because you can't really sum a string. It doesn't cast to a number. So that's problematic, obviously, right? So that could crash. So that's something to keep in mind as you're going through this. It expects that you know the type of function that you're running on it based on what's inside of the array. You have to be careful too, because sometimes that string can sneak in. So how can you create arrays? So there's 2 ways that are really easy. There's the implicit, which basically you create your name. So this is name array. Very creative, I know. Thank you. And you just set it with square brackets, quote, quote, comma, quote, quote, comma, quote, quote, comma. It's an array of strings, John, Jason, James, all the J's. Now, when you do that, now you have an array called name array implicit with those three items in the first three buckets, bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3. You can also explicitly create an array of multi-dimensions. So in this case, first name explicit, you're going to create an array of one dimension. That's what the 1 is. And then you're actually going to set first name position 2, John, first name position 3, Jason. What you've now done is you've created first an empty array that's one dimensional. Now you've put into positions 2 and 3 values, but left one blank. So actually that first one returns as undefined. So be very careful. If you're trying to access it, you can actually get an undefined error if you're trying to do something or manipulate it. And there's a huge list of built-in functions that work with arrays. There's 38 of them at last count, and I might be off by one with those. And some of them are a little, like they work with arrays, but they also work with other things. So you have to be a little bit, it's a little bit vague whether they actually count or not. We're going to look at 30 of them plus a bonus, which we'll show on the next slide. All right, sorry, not on the next slide. One more after this one. So when should you use an array? We talked about this with lists. And honestly, there's way less reasons not to use an array. Arrays are incredibly powerful. They're pretty much ubiquitous. Anytime that you need a set of iterable data that has either one or more dimensions, and you don't want to deal with delimiter issues, right? So this is all those reasons that lists might not be a great choice for things. Yeah, you usually end up going to arrays first and often staying there. They're really powerful. They're really useful, especially if you're bringing things in from other languages. Like I think I showed during Dev Week how you can actually use Python inside of ColdFusion. So if you bring in a data structure from Python, you're probably going to bring in an array, because those two things are just going to talk to each other fairly well. It's going to be a little bit of difference when you refactor it over, but you also, and another reason is if you want to use some of these built-in functions on your data to clean or manipulate it, there's some things that are pretty unique to arrays that don't really exist specifically in lists, but maybe not in other places too. Arrays really have the largest buffet of choices in built-in functions. And you don't need the key value dynamic of a struct. Structs have, the thing and the thing's value, and that's kind of part of it. Or if you don't need to use query object related functions like query of queries, for example, if you don't want to, if you don't have to have something act like a query, which is what the query object does, which by the way doesn't have to come from an actual database, but we'll talk about that in November, I think. And you don't want to deal with the delimiter issues as mentioned, as you run into lists. So those are some of the reasons. But again, almost universally, if you've got some data that you need to work with, you're probably either just going to have it in the query and just be done with it, because this is ColdFusion. That's kind of what we do. But if you want to do anything more complicated with it, you're pretty much going to end up putting it into an array. All right. Any difficulties? And yes, this page is slide's a little big. Apologies for that. I think the first thing is, for some people, especially new to programming, it's a little difficult to wrap your mind around what an array actually is. The bucket analogy is a pretty good one, but does break down a little bit, especially when you start talking about multi-dimensional arrays, like buckets inside of buckets inside of buckets. That starts to make your brain kind of go sideways on you, which I totally understand. I mean, for me, anything more than, like I said, 2 dimensions, and I just start like doing this and running the string along my wall and trying to figure stuff out. For key value pairs, as I mentioned, structs are just easier. Often people use arrays of structs. That's a very common thing. I've actually seen some people try to create key value pair data structures using an array of arrays, so a two-dimensional array, and that's fine. It's a little bit less easy to read the code because then you're accessing 1 2 1 2 1 2 constantly throughout. It just starts to get a little obfuscated, which I don't like. Now this is a big one, and apologies for hitting this one first. I know I'm starting I'm starting with the turkey dinner, and then we're going to go into some of the appetizers in a minute. But this is really critical and important. So when you copy arrays, and by the way, this is also going to apply to things like structs later that we'll talk about in the next session in October. Duplicate is a built-in function in ColdFusion that allows you to copy an array. But there's a caveat there. And for those of you who went through CS in college, you might know about things like pointers versus cloning. So if you do a duplicate on an array and it's not set to true for deep copy, you're actually only creating pointers to that array's children. So if you have a multi-dimensional array, the things underneath are actually not going to they're not going to do what you think they're going to do. So what could happen, and I'll show you this in a second. I actually have some code to show you in the CF Fiddle. But for here, we have an original, and then we deep copy the first one, and we shallow copy the second. So we set deep copy to false. And then we do a change to the shallow copy and a change to the deep copy, and we write output the stuff here. Now, let me show you real quick what that actually looks like. So here on the right, you can see the original after the edits. These are the changes that happen. You can see in the shallow copy that it's actually changed. So even though this is a copy, a clone, you would think a separate object, by not doing a deep copy, what we've all, the only thing that we've done is we've actually set, this is a pointer back up to there, versus in the deep copy, things stay the same. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. All right, now let's play with code. Here's the fun part. And by the way, if anyone has questions, comments, anything, please feel free to throw them into the chat. I'm happy to go over them now or at the end, whatever you'd like. All right, so I've built a little thing here. This is my array factory, and this has 30 different built-in functions that we're going to play with. You can actually create arrays that are thrown into session, and then you can apply the different objects to them. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I do have a little bit of a bug in this that I was unable to completely get rid of, and that is that occasionally the new array that I create takes a second to pick up the old array. So if you see me refreshing it once or twice, that's what's happening. All right, so let's create an array. Let's do animals. So we're going to do bat, cat, dog, dolphin. Oh, I don't know. It's giraffe. We love giraffes. And then we'll do a dog with an uppercase. Okay, so let's start off with array append. We're going to do this alphabetically because why not? And let's see. Sorry. 1 second. All right, so what is array append? As it sounds, and a lot of these, you're going to hear me saying the same thing, a lot of them, these are very well described as to what they actually do. So array append appends a value to the end of an array. So here we have bat, cat, dog, dolphin, giraffe, dog with lowercase. I'm going to go ahead and add fox. What does the fox say? And now this is where I was saying this thing likes to play with my emotions. There we go. For whatever reason, the first time it runs, sometimes that initial thing doesn't happen. So just ignore that. But now you can see now the original array is still up here. Bat, cat, dog, dolphin, giraffe, dog. I've created a new array with fox at the end of it. So that's all that does, basically. Very, very easy. You just have to remember that it's going to append all the way to the end. Now, if you are adding two arrays to each other, if I was to put some array values in there, and you were set the merge value to true, it would merge the two arrays instead of putting an array into the first position of that array, if that makes sense. Okay, array average. Now this is fun. You want to see it crash? It's actually not going to do anything. Oh, it is. Okay. Oh, I put a test in. Look at that. So good. So this is the first place where we run into this array functions like depend on what's actually in them. So our array currently is animals. It's a set of strings. Array average, though, requires you to have type numeric. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to clear this array. I'm going to create a new one. Okay. And I'm going to pull array average back. Okay. So now, if I hit average, that's the average of the array. So essentially, this does what you could manually do by doing a loop on each position of the array to array length, adding all of them, then dividing by the array length. This just does that for you. It's very easy. So this is great for calculations. If you're doing some data science type stuff, you can very easily grab that with the caveat. Remember that it needs to be numeric. All right, array clear. Array clear. You actually saw me clear the array already up top, but let's talk about what it does here. Very easy. You just use array clear and the name of the array that you want to clear. What this does is it just removes all the elements from the array, and it returns a Boolean. So it successfully came back and said, yep, the array is clear. And if you look up here, the array's been cleared and it's gone. So let's rebuild this and let's go back to some animals. Dog, dolphin, giraffe, elephant. Okay, so let's go to array contains. Now this is a twofer. This is one thing that you're going to see a lot, and that is that ColdFusion often will have built-in functions that have case-sensitive versions and non-case-sensitive versions, specifically when doing any kind of find. And that's what array contains essentially is going to be doing, right? So let me go ahead and type in DOG with a uppercase. Okay, so does the array contain the item with case? No, because the uppercase D in mine is not found in that. However, in the no case version, it does find it. And so you can see there, the syntax is name of the array and value for both of them. Very, very simple. All right. Back again to another case, no case type of situation. Array delete. So what this is going to do is we're going to search for, well, we can search for almost anything. We can search for structures, we can search for numbers, we can search for strings. Obviously, the no case version, there's no case for numbers, right? But let's go ahead and delete dog from that. So in both cases, it deleted dog out of the array, right? You can see that it's gone in there. Now let's go ahead and delete cat, lowercase. You can see the case-sensitive version stays the same, right? Because cat in that array has an uppercase C. The lower one, it didn't care if it was lowercase or uppercase. Okay. Array delete at. Now this again is this is an example where you have to remember array indices start at 1, right? This is a place where, let's say you did a search at some point to find the position of an element inside of your array. Like you wanted to search for something before deleting it, and you got back that dolphin is at position 3, which it is here, right? This is a way to delete things at a position without needing to know the actual content of the item. This can be useful for things like structures. So there you go. So I just deleted something at position 3, which was dolphin, and the array that came back does not have dolphin in there. Now, what has happened to this array is it did not blank position 3. They removed it, and that will reshift all of the other array elements. So whereas giraffe was array index position 4, it is now array index position 3. So this is important to know, right? If you're expecting that something is in a particular place in an array and you delete something, everything shifts over. However, that's actually kind of useful, right? It's kind of nice that everything shifts over on your own. You don't have to reset those indices and change values and things like that. And we'll see in a second where if we do need to like swap things or move things around, there's actually built-in arrays for that as well. Okay, so this is the first of what I would consider slightly more complex and modern programming focused built-in functions for arrays. So here what we're doing is we're going to iterate over every single element of this array, and we're going to do something to each element as it comes out. Okay? And the way that works is you're going to have an array name, and then you're actually going to put a callback in it, so a function. And just give me a second. I'm actually going to show you what this looks like in code in a second. So here, what I've done is I have code behind the scenes. The callback here will show you the index position. It's actually going to output the index position of each of these pieces, and it's going to upcase, which is a string function. It's going to upcase the value in that position in the array and output it. So I'm going to go ahead and process it, and there you go. We've got index 1, cat, dog, dolphin, giraffe, elephant. There we go. So now we've gone through and actually processed these things. This again can be useful for doing normalization of caps, right? You can change things like, for example, in data science, sometimes it's useful to run a function against the numbers to normalize them or spread them apart or do things like that so that you can get maybe a better looking graph, right? This is what you would use to actually do that. Now let me jump real quick into what the code looked like in here. Array function. Okay. So here's where the magic happens. We've got array each, right? We're putting in session.myArray. That's the value. And then we actually write a function. And that function is going to return back the value in the index that it's pulling back. And then we're just right outputting that and adding a break at the end of it. That's all we're doing. We're right outputting the index position and uppercasing the value that comes back. That's all. So easy enough. Let's go back here. Any questions on that? Because that throws some people occasionally. They're not used to doing a function inside of a built-in function. So if you have any questions, please let me know. All right. Array filter. Array filter is going to use a callback again. So we're in a place where we're doing a few callbacks, and unfortunately, apologies for this. These are kind of mixed in because we're going alphabetically. And what we're actually doing here is we're going to return back things that fit a particular filter that we're going to write. And that sounds like it's more complicated than it is. Again, I'll show you the code in a second. But here we have the current array contents, right? And let's return back everything that has a length longer than 1. Well, that's going to be all of them, right? Well, what about a length longer than 3? That's just those. Okay. So this can be used again for substring searches if you want to do that, for things that are over a particular number, if you want to have a cutoff number for some data, and you only want to return that back. Now let me show you real quick. This will look very familiar. So this is really it. We've got array filter as mentioned. We've got session.myArray that we're putting into it. The function, again, we're having value and index being passed in from filter. And we're going to return the value.length, right? So this is a member function here in ColdFusion that returns back the length of a particular value. In this case, it's the string length. That's greater than form.array. So longer than the number that I passed in from the form that came in from array filter. So here I had a form that had the number, that was the filter number. And we're going to return back only the things that come back, and we're going to dump back the items greater. So you'll notice something. I don't have to recreate an array. I don't have to loop through something and do that. This is automatically creating, this is returning a filtered array into this items greater. All right. Array find. Okay, so this is once again one of those case no case types of things. Now this is going to return back the first position of a specified object, right? So let's go ahead and do dog with an uppercase. So, and I did that real quick before explaining what it was because it was easier to show you than to talk about it. You can see the first, which is the first item, that's actually case sensitive, right? It's not the no case version. It returns back 0. Okay, as mentioned, array start at 1. So it returns back false, which is 0, which technically is out of range of the array, essentially telling you this does not exist inside the array. That string, case sensitive, does not exist anywhere inside of here. However, the no case version does find it in position 2 and returns back that position. So if you remember back array delete at, where you can delete at a position, what you can do is you can search for something here, get its position, and then delete at that position. And while that may seem sort of odd if you know the value, if you're, for example, looking for structures and things that are a little more complex, it can make sense. Now that was the first position that something exists in. So let me go ahead and add a few things. There we go. Okay, so now I have an array with potentially multiple instances of strings. Now, some are cased differently, and we'll see that. So let's go ahead and return back cat. Now you'll see this actually returns an array, and it returns an array of the positions that it's found at. So here, the lowercase cat is found at array position 7, right? This is the 7th thing, but it doesn't find the first one because it's case sensitive, and it doesn't have an uppercase. However, array find all case will return back an array with all the positions here, position 1 and position 7. So this is useful for doing things like figuring out how many times a particular value exists inside of an array. Very, very useful. You can do this for things like polls. You can do this for data science purposes, doing graphing, visualization, things like that. Very useful. All right. Array insert at. So just like we can look for something at a particular position or delete something at a particular position, we can also insert into a specified position. Now, what this is going to do, it's not going to overwrite the thing in that position, to be clear. That's not what this is. This is going to shift over everything to the right of that position and plop this into the spot where the old thing at the position was. So let's say in position 3, I want to put Fox. And I throw that, oh, it does this again. Sorry. I don't know why it does this. Position 3, Fox. There we go. And by the way, there's something going on with, I think, my sessions for this. It's not seeing the previous session object for a moment until it has to like reinitialize itself. I couldn't figure out where it was in my stuff. But anyway, okay. So here we go. So you'll see in position 3 now we have Fox, where Dolphin used to be. Dolphin has now moved over to position 4, Giraffe 5, Elephant 6, Dog 7, Cat 8. And there you go. Pretty easy. Again, this is useful for things like rosters, right? If you want to, put someone in a particular place in a roster that's not the end or the beginning, this is a way to shove things in that works. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier during the slides that you could create a blank or a non-existent array position, right? When we initialized a single dimensional array and added John and James to positions 2 and 3, position 1 had nothing in it, right? If you tried to access that, you could get an error because it was undefined. So it's useful to be able to return back whether something in that position is defined or not. Now we have an array. All the positions in here are defined, right? Like, so if I say check 2, it's defined. Now let's see if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What about position 8? Not defined. There's nothing there. Doesn't exist, right? So if you want to check for the existence of something, you can use this. Very useful for defensive programming, for example, to keep errors out. That kind of thing. All right. So similarly, You can check to see whether an array has no elements. Now, when might you use that? This could be useful. In fact, probably could use this to figure out the issue that I have where my array is not being instantiated and is just adding something. I could test whether array is empty is true for that particular array and mess around with it. Probably will do that maybe before pushing this code up so you guys don't have to deal with that. But if I check this particular array, it's going to tell me that it's not empty, right? And let me show you the code real quick here for that, just so that you know what's going on. So here you go. We're going to set the isEmpty variable to array is empty. It's going to return back a Boolean. And that's all it is. It just returns true or false whether that item is empty or not. And then here, if it is empty, I'm just returning back array is empty. And then here, since it wasn't empty, I'm giving you, has this many elements using array len, which we're going to talk about in a second. All right, array is empty. Oh, look at that. What a transition. What a transition. Array length. This returns the number of individual elements in an array. Very, very useful for doing things like looping, iterating, figuring out also whether. Now, this is one of the first places where you might go, wait, what's the difference between array is empty and array length? Because if an array is empty, it still exists, but has 0 positions in it. An array length, you could test for whether the array length is less than 1. You're right. This is a place where it's just easier to pass in array is empty and then figure out whether it's a Boolean or not than to do a true false on array length less than 1. Kind of a functional thing. Okay, so we've got an array here. I'm sure you can all guess. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Get the length, and sure enough, the array length is 7. Very, very useful. Use this all the time in programming. All right, array map. Array map. Now, this, again, is similar to something that we had earlier, array each. This applies a transformation or a function to each element of an existing array. The difference is that there's less options here. So in array each, you can do parallel programming. You can set max thread count. In array map, you don't have that. This is a simpler thing. This was added later for simplicity's sake, if you don't need all of that other functionality. So here we've got all of our stuff. We can convert it to uppercase like we did in the other one. We can reverse each string. So let me show you real quick what that one looks like. So you can see uppercase function, lowercase function, length function, and we're returning the uppercase, lowercase, length, reverse, all that fun stuff. So, and here we're doing the map and passing in the function into here. By the way, you'll see I'm doing a mix of CF script and CF tags. And I'm doing this primarily because I did get some feedback on my previous talk that some people still use tags and they'd like to be able, they'd love to move to CF script, but they also want to be able to do stuff inside of their tag-based systems right now because they're not able to refactor. So that's why you're seeing there's a little bit of mixture between tags and script here. You can do all of these things in both, just so you're aware of that. Okay. Array map. Array max. Can someone guess what's going to happen here if I hit find max. You can take a wild guess what's going to happen. Even though this does say string, so this is actually it's a red herring. If I were to try to find max on this array content, this is going to crash. Why? Because max is going to try to find the single maximum value inside of the array. Value, that's the keyword. Now, even though it says string, the reason it says string is because ColdFusion has the ability to cast strings to values. So if I had a set of strings that said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 2000 or whatever, it could theoretically cast those and it could still get the max of those. However, this should just do nothing. Yeah, so this is actually crashing. And if I inspect this, find max. So you can see it's a non-numeric value. So let's go ahead and clear this array out. And go back to array max here and find the maximum value. 345435 is the maximum value in that particular thing. So a little bit of a gotcha, there. All right. Very few points for guessing what array min will do. And again, you can kind of see, like, we're gonna show you in a little bit that there's sorting built-in functions, and in both cases, you could theoretically get the array max and the array min by doing a sort on a numeric sort on the array and pulling either the first or the last element. Absolutely a thing you could do, but it's much easier to have one function to grab that min or max value. So we go in here. The min value is 33, and that's correct. That's the smallest number in that. Now, this seems like a fairly basic and trivial thing, but imagine if you had arrays with thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. This could be a very useful way to get that minimum number or that maximum number. Scoring, for example, on tests, things like that. You want to find out what that top and bottom number is for your endpoints on either side. Okay, array new. So here we sort of saw some ways to do explicit creation of arrays. So if I want to do that, here's a one-dimensional array. Here's a two-dimensional array. And a three-dimensional array. As mentioned before, this is as deep as CF is able to access. And again, it starts just getting a little bit mind-numbing when you go deeper than that. Yeah, not very fun. All right, you remember array append takes something and puts it onto the end of an array. As you can guess, array prepend takes something and puts it at the very beginning of an array and shifts everything else over. So very, very useful. This is, again, something where you could do this manually. Like, you could take every single position, add one to them, creating something blank in the very first position, and then add something to it. Very painful. This does it all for you. So in this case, an item to prepend, let's do 101. I'm going to prepend it here, and of course it's going to do that to me. Yes, I knew it. I really got to fix that bug. There it is. Okay, there you go. We have 101 at the very beginning. If you need to add like a header to something, if you have an array that has like content and needs a first position, this is the way that you can do it. All right, array reduce. This is definitely an interesting one. This returns back a single value. That's the way that you can remember what this one does. So it reduces down, like you're making a sauce, you're reducing it down to one concentrated thing based on a callback that you're passing into it. So here, as it just so happens, I have an array of numbers. So I can reduce that down, and that's just going to sum all of them. I'm putting a callback in. I'll show you this in a second. I'm putting a callback which sums all of them. But I could also concatenate them all. And that's actually fun. So you'll notice that that said concatenate all the strings, right? It's ColdFusion. So you can force ColdFusion to treat these numbers essentially as a string of numbers, and that's what that did, and put everything together all in one set. Let's go look at what some of this looks like. So here we go. All of the different functions. So we've got a concatenate function, a sum function, right? And you'll notice there's an accumulator. So that's sort of the that's the place where you're holding the previous position's value, whatever that happened to be. A max, a min. You saw earlier, those are built in. And this is a way that you can figure out which of those it is. And so remember, as long as one value is returned, it's okay if it's one out of all of them. That's actually fine, as long as it's one value. And then count the number of them as well. And there you go. Array reduce, min function, count function, all the good stuff. Concat. Okay. Array resize. As you might imagine, this is going to resize an array to a specified size, meaning if there's 4 elements in an array, that array has a size of 4. If I make the new size 5, what that's going to do is going to create an empty array position at position 5. So let's see, we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do a new array of 6, resize it. Now this is really hard to see, so apologies for that. But right here, you can see there's a little blank blue, the little blank blue dot. That's a blank array position that's being returned back. There's nothing there. And you can see it's resized to 6. Now, if I resize this to 4, it's going to crash. Of course it is. All right. I'll deal with that crash in the code when we push it back. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Array set. So this is an interesting one. Let's say that you create an array and you're going to be using this array to populate a set of form fields, let's say. And you want all of those form fields to have the same value, like add name here or something like that. What you can do is you can use array set to start from the beginning to whatever the end is and set those values to a particular thing. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at position 6 to position 9, I want the values to all be 0. Let's say 0 has a particular meaning in this case, but I still want those things to have a value. I don't want them to be undefined. If I set them, you can actually see what it's done is it's taken the values that were there before and then set 6, 7, 8, 9 to all be 0. It's also a way of blanking out things. So if I also wanted 1 through 8 to be 0, I could do it that way. So you can use this to take an entire array and set every single position to a particular thing. All you have to do is 1 to array length, and pass that in. Don't do that unless you mean it. All right, where are we on time? Oh my goodness, we're getting okay. Array metadata. I swear we're very close to the end. I'm gonna try going a little bit faster here. Sorry about that. This one is really insanely hard to show with an actual running demo. So I've got some sample code. I'm gonna try to talk you through this. So array item data can have metadata attached to it. This is, again, very useful when using serialized JSON, where you may or may not know the actual types of the values, but you want to maintain those in some way. Okay, so here we have some sample code, we have inputs, and then we're actually going to pass the metadata in for all those items. And we're going to set the metadata to be the inputs with the metadata that we're passing in. And this is actually going to return back the correct type of thing, right? So this is numeric, this is an integer, right? This is a string, this is a Boolean, right? So you can see it's changed the value somewhat to pass in the correct actual values. So again, this is really important when working with JSON data. That was an issue in the past where JSON data would lose some of its values because it's often being passed with quotes when it's coming in from other systems, and across that transition, you'll lose the actual types, which can then be problematic if you're trying to drop them into a database with certain types. This can allow you to set the metadata correctly and keep that across barriers that don't normally pass it. So apologies, I know that's a little complicated, but this is an important thing. You'll run into this at some point. Okay, array slice. Now you're gonna see this from JavaScript. I'm sure that you have been here, done that. This returns a portion of an array from a specified starting position to the specified ending position. So in this case, let's pass from 2 to 4. And we're going to come back with 2, 3, 4. And why did that return back 5? That's interesting. Wait a minute. That seems wrong. 2 to... Oh, because did I put in 5? That doesn't seem right. 3, 2, 4. Okay, something's going on there. Sorry about that. This was working last night. Just know that if you need a slice from one to the other, this is how you do it. I'll have to have that fixed. All right, array sort. This is something, again, we talked about earlier about if you needed the max min, you could array sort something. Here we've got a numeric array, right? And so we can sort that into its min to max positions here. And so if you needed min max on this, you could do position 1 or position array length. And that would return back the min and max. Again, we already have things that are built in for that, so you don't need that. Array sum. This is going to now, again, we saw if you use array reduce, you can actually pass in a callback and reduce down to a sum if you wanted to. This is a way of doing that that's a little bit easier. And also notice that this does support parallel processing. Often when you're doing array sums, you've got multiple arrays, you've got lots and lots of data, you're processing it all at once, you're hitting the CPU really hard. This is a way to actually do parallel processing on that and return back like a lot of stuff. So here we're going to calculate the sum, and there it is, 350412. Why is that coming back lower? No, wait a minute. That seems wrong. Oh, no, that's right, 35. Okay, sorry. I can count, really. No, I'm a programmer. I don't do math. Array swap. Okay, so earlier we talked about inserting something into a position, right? Here we can swap the position of two different elements, and I'm going to make this a little bit easier by doing like animal names, because that's easier than numbers to see when we actually do it. All right, swap. Okay, so if I want to swap position 1 with position 3, I can, you'll see fox and giraffe have swapped places, 1 and 3. So this is a very easy way. Instead of like get value at this position, put that into a variable, get value at this position, and then swap those numbers. This does it for you. Much easier. Array to list. We talked about lists last month. And if you remember, there's a list to array. There's also an array to list. So if you want to go back down and create a list based on array for whatever reasons, there might be reasons that you want to do that. You can do that here. And you can actually set the delimiter that you want between them. So I'm going to go ahead and create this fox, dog, giraffe, cat with a comma delimiter. You can also do it with pipes. You can do it with whatever. You can actually pass whatever delimiter you want. Again, this is useful for like listing stuff out to screen. One thing that I had not mentioned, by the way, that's important is if you are trying to throw stuff to screen, you've seen where I'm putting stuff out and it's in the green boxes and all that. The reason that that doesn't just look like text is because I'm CF dumping it out. I'm not write outputting it. The reason why is it's a complex object. If you try to write output a complex object, ColdFusion doesn't know what to do with it. You actually have to dump it, which then creates the structures for it. So, for example, if you didn't want that, if you just wanted the text to appear on your screen like this, right? Putting that array into a list is a very easy way of doing that. Then you don't have to dump it out and have all the structures. And by the way, when you do a CF dump, it actually adds a bunch of CSS and can sort of mess with your screen. So this is an easy way to actually like throw that stuff to screen a little bit easier. Okay. Array push. So this adds one or more elements to the end of an array and returns the new length of the array. You're like, wait, array append. That adds something to the end. Yes. That adds one item and has no return that comes. It returns void. It doesn't bring anything back. So this is a way to add items to the end and figure out what the new length is. So if you're adding a bunch of data and then have to, for example, loop through the new data, you already have that in there. So let's add a silly goose and watch. Yeah, it's going to do that to me. Of course it is. There we go. Okay, so now I've added goose to the end, and the new array length is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. The old array was length 4. So now I'm able to loop that. You can feed that directly into if you've got a CF loop that requires a from to, that's your to. One last one. Apologies for going over, everyone. The last one, this removes and returns the last element. So easy enough, put in the array that you want to pop. Returns back cat, and now you can see the array is now only 3 elements long. It used to be 4, and that last element is no longer there. So if you're doing processing, like queuing, you can array pop the end element, do whatever you need with it. That array now has one less element. You can array pop it again, array pop it again, array pop it again, and go through until you're back to array length 0. And you're good to go. And that's it, folks. That is it. Let's see. Do we have any questiones for me? Or is everyone's brain a little bit fuzzy? As you're thinking of questions, by the way, this is a way to get in touch with me. My email mailbox is always open at takata@adobe.com. We've got a LinkedIn that you are free to add me on if you have questions. This is our YouTube channel, Adobe ColdFusion/videos. Please make sure you put the Adobe at the beginning. YouTube/ColdFusion is not us. Sorry about that. And then the GitHub where these webinars are going to be. This actually has stuff from a bunch of my webinars, but there will be one here for Foundations arrays, and you'll be able to pull down this code after I fix a couple of the bugs. Sorry about the bugs, folks. Does occasionally happen. Even AI can't fix all that, right? Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. I'm just going to wait a couple minutes here to see if anybody has any questions. If not, I do want to thank everyone for attending today. It's been my pleasure to show you some of the fundamentals and foundations of ColdFusion in arrays. Please stay tuned for not next month, but the following month, we will be doing query objects and potentially following that up with some of the string built-in functions. We'll see. Actually, sorry, structs are in October, queries are in November, and I believe we're going to do strings in December. September, though, while I have you here,